Good evening, everybody. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it. You might know me as the funny guy from Instagram with the memes. And that's cool. They get a lot of traction. People like them. And I'm not going to stop doing them. But really, why I started the page and why I'm doing the human side of construction is really to help the industry and the people in it, because we're in a bit of a difficult situation when it comes to labor and all that. But we'll get into some more details. So really, I wanted to kind of create a forum, place for everybody to come in and just share ideas, share experiences. And so my hopes for this is it is interactive, just kind of a quick objective. I'm going to talk for about 10-15 minutes on some insights, share some of my experiences with construction specific to mentorship and how I got to this point in my career. And again, I wanted to create a venue for people to openly share their experiences and just build a bit of a community. Moving on, for those of you who know me, I'm a little bit of a cheese ball. Maybe it's my Greek background, or I get a little bit philosophical sometimes, but I talk a lot about relationships. Okay, so here's a quote that kind of resonates with me: "Is the quality of your relationships will dictate your success and happiness and experience in both life and work." Okay, so the stuff that we're talking about here, it's primarily to be used, in construction, because that's what we're here for. We're here to learn about the industry and how we can make ourselves better. But this stuff's going to help in your real life too, right? Your life outside of work, whether it's relationships with your spouse, your cousins, your family, people you meet at the street, strangers you meet at the bar, whatever. Like, these are life skills that oddly enough aren't taught, but they're super important for both your success and happiness in life. So just a little bit about me. Again, you might know me as the funny internet guy, but I'm actually a construction guy. I've been in the industry almost 20 years, mostly on the project management / estimating side. I have an engineering background. Don't hold it against me, but I didn't go into consulting, thank God. I ended up working in construction right after I graduated. Kind of a fluke, actually. I couldn't find a job doing anything else, so I ended up working in construction. But I fell in love with the industry right away. Okay, so 20 years later, flash forward, I've been on all sides of the industry. I've been in project management, estimating. I've worked for owners, mostly on the mechanical subtrade side, and that's where I am now. I'm at a director level at a mid-sized mechanical company here in Ontario, in Canada, and just really enjoying the industry. But as my passion for the industry grew with my experience, so did my frustration with the way things operate, right? Like, a lot of the industry has become transactional. It's like we've forgotten how to treat people, and there's like an old school mentality of treating people like shit. That's the internal problem. So looking to improve the human experience in that point of view, but also, externally, the general population doesn't really appreciate or understand, what the hell we do, even though it's a little concerning because it's so ubiquitous and critical to the progress of society. Like, every road you drive on, every building you're in, whether you go to church or hospitals, like, it's all part of the design build process. So I think more people need to know that. So it's a bit of a disservice. Just some housekeeping or general rules here before we get going. There are a few people live on the call here, so thanks. I appreciate your time. If you want to grab a paper and a pen, if you have something handy, or just jot notes on your phone. I know sometimes when I'm listening to webinars or listening to people speak, I get odd sparks of inspiration or just ideas, and 5 minutes later I'll be like, oh fuck, what was that? I forgot. So it's good to have something handy. I have one too, because I'm hoping to open up some dialogue here at the end, and we can get a little bit interactive. For those of you on the call, please stay on mute just for the first 10-15 minutes while I'm talking. Feel free to use the chat if you have questions, if you want to put something in there so you don't forget. That's cool. And basically just have an open mind. Like, some of the language you're going to hear here is not typical of construction, and you might think it's a little bit light and fluffy, and you might think like, what the hell is this guy talking about? But just really, let it sit for a bit and see how, take the good and leave the bad, do whatever you want with it. Just have an open mind. So just a little bit of the outline, what I'm going to get into, just kind of 40,000 foot view, is these elements, and I'll explain later how they tie into mentorship. But basically, we're going to talk about building your personal brand, building authentic connections, strategies for career advancement, and developing a path forward. So when you look at all this stuff, you're probably thinking, this doesn't really apply to mentorships or relationship. This just applies to myself. So really the point here is it starts with you, whether it's mentorship or your career development, personal development. It starts with you. You're not going to be able to initiate a relationship, which is essentially what a mentorship is, unless you learn that skill of working on yourself, finding out how to communicate with people, finding out how to connect with people. So that's what I'm really passionate about. And honestly, that's probably the biggest factor that's contributed to the success in my personal career is, just working on that skill and realizing that it's important. So a couple of things about what mentorship is and what it is not. So what mentorship is, in my experience, I didn't Google this or get any textbook definitions, but it's help and guidance. It's support when needed, and it's dynamic, meaning two ways. It's not just like, the mentor sits down with you and tells you everything they know. It has to be dynamic in two ways. And it's led by the mentee. So you might be thinking, this might be counterintuitive, because you might be thinking like, oh, I thought, somebody was just going to come and hold my hand and it's going to feel like I've been touched by God and that's going to change my life, which very rarely is the case. Okay, so let's look at that. That's kind of high level what mentorship is. Let's talk about what it isn't, and then we'll get into a little bit more details there. So what mentorship is not. So a lot of people think like I need a formal structure. They'll look to their company or they'll look to some sort of service to formally match them with somebody, which some cases that can work. Some cases that's an opportunity. Largely, it doesn't really work like that. I've been through it, and frankly, 3 out of the 4 pairings I've got were downright awkward, because it's tough when you're matched with people just based on like a profile you submit. It's not necessarily a fit, and really you have to have that personal connection and be able to have a conversation to do it. And usually that comes from informal contact, whether it's a boss you have or a coworker who's looked out for you or somebody that you just vibe with and you enjoy spending time with. It's not a 24/7 hotline. I know in the past I've kind of leaned on people a lot, and they've kind of said like, look, buddy, I like helping you out, but I need some personal space. So, it's important for everybody to respect those boundaries and understand them and explore it. And it's not static. So it's not one way. Again, it's a two-way street. It's a two-way conversation. So just a little bit about my experience in mentorship on both sides. I turned 40 this year, so I've been in the industry 20 years, and I remember starting out. I remember reading that you need to have a mentor, right? It's an important part of your career. And I remember kind of wandering around aimlessly, like looking at people like, oh, will you please be my mentor? And I might have given off a little bit of a desperate vibe. But looking back now, I can honestly say there were 2 or 3 guys who were my mentors, and I didn't realize it at the time, because they just took me under their wing, and they showed me the way and they taught me things, and I didn't even know it was happening. So if you're at that point in your career where you're struggling a little bit and you're like, nobody's really helped me, my company doesn't have a formal structure, just take a minute and think about some people that you work with currently or have worked with. And I bet you somewhere along the ways there's been somebody who's helped you out, and you might not have even realized it. So don't look for that formal structure necessarily. And again, like I said here, it starts with you. So that's why the next little bit we're going to focus on a little bit of personal development and ways that you can kind of help out your career, because you can't necessarily control who you're going to come across with or who you're going to be paired with on site, who your boss is. But what you can control is the skill set you have and the skill set you can develop, and what you can work on within yourself. Okay. Any questions so far? Are you rock and roll? Somebody has joined the call here. I got to make it so next time it automatically lets people in. Okay, so the first part about learning about yourself, basically developing your brand. Okay, it's hard to know where you're going or put a plan together if you don't know yourself. And by know yourself, I don't mean sit in a dark room and like listen to your thoughts. It's just evaluate your core values. Evaluate what you're good at. Your experience, your education, kind of the whole kit and caboodle, the whole package. Because really, going back to mentorship again for a second, it's really just a component of a successful career. You can have a successful career without mentorship, and you can have mentorship without a successful career. It's all part of the kind of recipe. So it starts with knowing yourself, establishing core values. I believe everybody, regardless of your experience or your education, you have a unique selling proposition. This might be one of those weird internet terms you've seen or whatever, and it's kind of a fuzzy meaning, but truly everybody is unique. You have a specific set of skills and personality that makes you different. And really, what was the best part for me, and it took me a long time. I didn't realize this until I was in my 30s. But the things that I thought made me quirky and weird and unusual is what really made me interesting and what really made me a great, person. Whether that's a worker, a partner, husband, father, all that stuff. So it's really just finding about yourself and owning it. Again, you might be thinking to yourself, what the fuck is this guy talking about? I work in construction. But honestly, this is applicable to just humans. It's just human stuff. It's not necessary. It's not specific to any industry. The last one there is important. Take care, number one. I think a lot of people, especially in construction, our boundaries get pushed a lot, right? You might end up doing things you're not comfortable with. You might have to work long hours, shitty conditions, and sometimes you just got to suck up and do it. But you really have to understand your boundaries, because no job, no project, no team is worth, sacrificing your own mental health and physical health for. So make sure you establish your boundaries, know what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. Okay, again, I'm going over this pretty quick, but it's supposed to be a 40,000 foot view, and it's just to kind of get the juices flowing for some conversation later. So once you've got kind of the foundation, step one was knowing yourself and knowing basically your starting point. Okay. Next, once you've kind of figured that out or started to figure that out, you work on your connections with people. Because let's face it, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Okay, you can be the best person in the world technically. You can know everything, be the best in your field. If you're an asshole and you don't know how to talk to people and you piss everybody off, your career is going to be limited unless you're like Elon Musk or something, super genius. But what's important there for connections is knowing your audience. Okay, and by that I mean it might sound like you're manipulating people, but it's knowing who you need to work with to get to where you want to go, which is different from climbing the corporate ladder and shitting on people and stepping on them on the way to the top. Okay. Why it's important to know your audience? You need to know how to tailor your package, your communication, emails, all that stuff to where they're going, because you need to connect with that person properly. For example, if you're in the field and you're trying to connect with your foreman or a superintendent, you're probably going to talk a little bit different than if you're in the office and you're trying to connect with your VP. There's just language is different, formality is different, and you can't use the same method in every single situation you're in. You're going to have to tailor it depending on who you're going to. An important part of that is building authentic connections. Okay. The word authentic there is probably the most important part of that, and maybe the most important part of everything we're talking about here. Because if you're phony and you're pretending and you're faking it, people see through that, and they're not going to trust you. And it's almost like a subconscious thing. Like how many times you can probably think of situations where you've been talking to somebody and you might be thinking this guy doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about, or this person's not being, or they're not being forthcoming, or even just the way they're acting, it doesn't align with how they've acted in the past, and your brain subconsciously picks up on this stuff and there's a misalignment. So again, this comes back to knowing yourself and owning it, because if you're pretending you're trying to fit into somebody else's box, A, people are going to see right through it, and B, you're not going to feel comfortable doing it, and it's not going to stick, and you're not going to get any traction. So authenticity is huge. Active listening and empathy. Empathy is something I'm still practicing and not really the best at, but it's an important part of human skill in connecting with people. It's probably the most important part of connecting with people, especially when you're faced with difficult times. But active listening, very important tool for communicating. I think a lot of the ways that we're taught to communicate, especially in construction, is just getting your message across. Like, how do you win an argument? You talk louder than the other person or longer than the other person. A lot of times when they're trying to talk to you or get their message through, you're not really listening because you're already thinking about the next thing that you're going to say to them, right? I know I do this all the time, and it takes a special skill to sit and actually listen. And a quote that resonates with me, I forget who said it, but it was, listen with the intent to understand, not to be understood. Okay, I'll say that again. Communicate with the intent to understand, not to be understood. I think a lot of people do the latter, and it's a lot of times you'll miss the point because you might even be on the same page, but it's the language you're using. You might not be listening, and might make things worse in that regard. Finding common ground. So a lot of times, this is especially if you're in a negotiation or an argument, or say there's a clash on site and you're arguing with somebody about interference, whatever. A lot of times, it's not going to be a win-lose situation. Because in a win-lose situation, if you win and you intimidate the other person, or you trick them, or you argue your way out of it, that person's going to walk away probably pissed off. And what if something comes up the next day or the next week? Are they willing to help you out or go out of their way? Probably not. So I'm not saying, bend over for everybody and accommodate to every single thing, because you can't do that. Again, you have to have boundaries, but always look for a common ground. Always look for win-win, because that's going to help you build connections. And the more you do for other people, the more they're going to do for you in return. Not everybody, but in most cases. And the last one we already kind of touched on, transparency and authenticity. Obviously super important to connect with people there. Okay, so far we've looked at, working on yourself, understanding what makes you tick, how to make yourself better. Then we looked at the importance of connecting with others. So the next part is, how do you tie those two together? So now that you've known yourself, now that you've, identified people you need to connect with and how you're going to do it, what are the strategies you're going to implement to get them, right? So we talked a little bit about communication methods, but everybody works a little bit differently. And again, this will vary based on the role you're in, if it's site-based, office-based. And I've noticed this is a big challenge when you're talking about different generations. Again, I'm 40, so I'm an elder millennial. I was around before the internet was. I'm almost ashamed to admit that, but I was. And for us, we still pick up the phone and call people. I don't think twice about it. I'm a little bit old school like that. Yeah, I'll text, I'll email, but my number one go-to, especially if you're trying to provide context or need to solve a problem, it's either in person, you go see whoever you need to talk to, or you pick up the phone and call them. Because so much communication is lost when you don't have that nonverbal aspect. I remember seeing some stat, it was like 80% of communication is nonverbal. Like when you're looking somebody in the eyes and you're having a conversation with them, and their eyes are shifting around and look uncomfortable, you wouldn't pick that up on a phone call or an email or a text. So, it's hard to misinterpret things. So very important communication method. Second one here, don't network, connect. So not a big fan of the term network in the traditional sense, because people think it's, going out to social events and industry events and parties and schmoozing with people, which that's one way to do it. But I focus more on connecting, because you can imagine, I know if anybody's in Toronto right now, there's the building show, which is the biggest construction trade show in North America. I was there. It was very overwhelming. We did a live podcast on mental health and construction, which was pretty cool. But there's just so much going on, and then everybody's coming up to talk to you, and you don't really have a chance to connect with anybody. It's more just, hi, how you doing? Business card, next person. So the best way, honestly, to make true meaningful connections are through, informal, frequent interactions. If you work at a site with somebody and you want to connect with, inevitably you're going to pass them. Whether you're doing a site walk, maybe you're in the same trailer and you're heating up your lunch or whatever. If you're in your office, you're going to the fridge or the coffee machine, the proverbial water cooler. Those are the best places to make those small connections. Find commonalities with people. That's huge. That'll help form connections. Whether maybe you like the same sports team, or maybe you're into the same type of food, or you watch the same shows. It's stuff like that that makes your brain connect and essentially like somebody. Because let's face it, any type of relationship, whether it's business or otherwise, in order for people to do business with you or hang out with you, they have to know, like, and trust you. Those are the three things you need to focus on: know, like, and trust. And mentorship is no different. If somebody, they have to be familiar with you, so they have to know you. If they don't trust you, they're not going to waste their time, because time is valuable, especially these days. And they have to like you, because, again, they're not going to go out of their way and waste their time if they don't get something from it. Which leads me to the next point: always provide value. So especially if you're a younger person and you're listening and you're thinking, like, that's great, Angelo, this all sounds good, but I just graduated, or I'm a first year apprentice. I got nothing to give. That's not the case, because you might not be able to produce, in the traditional sense, whether it's on site or in the office, but you can help somebody with, I don't know, some sort of technology, help them figure out how to use Procore. Everybody's on fucking Procore now. You can even just, make them feel good, tell a joke, make them smile, uh, get them a coffee, just little things like that. So don't undersell yourself, because everybody has something to offer. And again, that's going back to the two-way nature of mentorship. It's not just one way where, I love working with younger people because I always get stuff from them, even if it's just a fresh perspective. I'll be explaining a process and they'll say, well, why do you do it this way? My initial reaction used to be like, because this is the best way to do it, or else I wouldn't be telling you. But now I've learned to stop and think and ask, is there a better way to do it? So, you can always provide value in different types of ways. Navigating transition. So a big part of this, especially if you're working on yourself and you're not used to it, even if you are used to it, it comes down to change management, which is probably the most difficult thing in the world, change, because it's unknown, uncomfortable, and it can be a little bit scary. So there's a lot of good literature out there and a lot of ways to handle change management and deal with the uncertainty there. So that's the first three parts, and really the fourth part here is your path. Coming up with a plan using all those three components. So you worked on yourself, you know who you need to connect with, you've worked on how you can connect with them, and it's basically developing your path. Because anytime, to use an analogy, if you go out on a trip, which really, that's what life is, that's what your career is, you're going on a trip in a certain direction, you have a goal on where you're going, when you're going to get there, the stops you're going to take to get there. At least you should, even short, mid, or long term, whatever. So it's super important to have a plan and stick to it. That doesn't mean what you decide now isn't going to change in 6 months, 12 months, 5 years. The plan can keep evolving and be continuous and continuous improvement, which is another point here. But it's important to know to have an idea on where you're going and measure against that, or else you might get to a point like I did in my 30s, and I'm like, fuck, I've just been on the train tracks moving forward with my head down, and I'm doing okay, but how did I end up here? So you might feel like, oh, I'm just here, I'm helpless, I just have to work to pay the bills. You have a little bit of control over your life and the decisions you make and the people you connect with. So be methodical about it, put some thought into it, and I think you'll be pleased with the outcome when you put a little bit of effort into planning. Brand maintenance. So again, part of step one was establishing your personal brand, whether you post on socials or just get out and talk to people. Your brand is how you present yourself, whether it's online or in person. So you have to keep maintaining that. Again, this comes back to being authentic and just have continuity with it. Because if you set the bar here and then you start performing because you're really down at this level, people are going to see, well, that doesn't add up, like what's going on here. So it takes continuous work, and it can be annoying, and it does take effort, but it's worth it in the long run. And yeah, again, touching on continuous improvement, it's important to keep wanting to get better, and it's not necessarily have to be a daily thing or a weekly thing. It could be a monthly effort where you set aside time for personal development or analyzing your relationships or checking into your plan or whatever. But you always want to try and be just a little bit better all the time. And last but not least, this is all about building your legacy. The way I look at it, and I had somebody ask me today after our talk, somebody came up and goes, "You still work in construction?" I said, "Yeah." She says, "Well, what's in it for you? Are you doing all this?" And honestly, it's going to sound cheesy, but I want to leave the construction industry better than how I found it, even if it's just a little bit. Even if it's just talk to a dozen people on a Google Meet and Instagram Live. I want to have an impact on people's lives. I want to make the industry and the world a better place. So that's the legacy I want to leave. And I challenge you guys to think about what you want to do for your lives and your careers. So we've got about 30 minutes. Happy to open up the chat here. Let me open up my window and see if anybody wants to add anything. Just raise your hand or come off mute. There's about a dozen people online, so.
I don't know if it's a question or a statement, but hopefully a talking point nonetheless. But I've been really finding myself in this last decade or so in construction that being with the right people, as cheesy and cliche as it sounds, is way more important than whatever company, whatever sticker is on the side of my truck. So what do you base, I guess, to make it a talking point, what do you base picking the right group as far as your career transitions and stuff? Like, how do you sit down and formulate a plan as far as what type of people you plan on working with in the future?
It's a very good question. I think it just comes back to, again, knowing yourself and knowing your core values. I know I've worked at places where one in particular comes to mind. I won't name any names because it didn't end that well. But I thought, you know what, this is like gold. This is the jackpot. I had a management position. It was a big company. There was a potential to move up, and they were a big player in the industry. And it ended up being a terribly toxic culture. And I kept telling myself, like, you just got to stick it out. And when you get to a certain point, you're going to be able to impact a little bit of change. And it ended up burning me out. I had some other stuff go on too in my life, and basically had a breakdown and had to take a little bit of leave. But long story short, Neil, great question. Know yourself and just look for that in other people. And the tough part is when you're looking online or you're interviewing with companies, you're not getting the real goods. You're not getting the real feel for what it's like to work for that company. And the same is true on the opposite direction. I know I've been in interviews on both sides of the table. And when you're interviewing somebody, it's like when you first start dating. You're not really meeting them, you're meeting their representative. And the real them doesn't come out until 3 to 6 months later when they get comfortable and stop pretending and trying to be their best and fall into their old ways. I'm not saying that all people are like evil and anything like that, but if you know your core values and stay true to them, and that's the beauty of working of being online, right? Because you can see who works at different companies. You can reach out and say, hey, you know what, I've applied for this job. um, what's your experience there? Uh, is it really true? I saw this on the website. What's it really like? They might be hesitant to tell you, but there's a lot of opportunities there. And that's part of why I wanted to create this community and this type of forum, was to have those types of conversations. Because Neil, thanks for bringing that up. I'm sure there's other people who have had similar experiences and they didn't have somebody to talk to, which is, essentially kind of addressing your question too.
In line and really good advice as well. Like I'm finding at age 40 myself for another couple of days. My birthday's on Saturday, but I'll hang in while I can. The mentor-mentoree relationship has very much so been a two-way street for me, and I found it to be very interesting. I learn a lot more from the younger people I work with than I do the older people. Including the true value of going to work. I use the old adage myself that I used to be able to just throw money at people and tell them, you're working on Saturday. Like, you guys slacked off all week. Now we haven't gotten anything done. I need you guys in here. I'll see you 7 o'clock. And like, if you try that on a job site nowadays, even the last 2 or 3 years, that will not fly at all, because I find these younger people, they're too smart. They know they won't own a house when they're 30 or even 35. So like, no, I'm gonna go spend time with my family. You can work all you want. So
Yeah.
it's a really good advice you gave.
Well, and it's funny because I hear that from older people. I hate to use the term older people, but it's the old school mentality, right? And younger people just don't put up with that shit because, um, again, if they say, well, you got to do it, and then what's in it for me? Oh, you get to keep your job. Well, that doesn't work anymore because we're competing with other industries, right? Sexier industries, tech, AI, all this stuff, finance, and we need other people we can get, so we got to change. That's my favorite conversation with older people, is that the younger generation, they don't want to work and they have this sense of entitlement. And I say, don't confuse entitlement with self-respect, because I think before there were issues with people drawing boundaries and putting up with shit that they didn't need to and they weren't comfortable with, and the younger generation isn't going to do that. So not to say we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there are a lot of good aspects about old school construction and the way things operate, because you do need to have grit. You do need to have a level of toughness to work in the industry, both physical and mental. So that's an important aspect that you can't discredit. But if I was to use like an analogy with my hands, if you had the older generation way at this side, like old school, treat people like shit, yell, scream, pound on tables. And the younger generation, which I'm talking like young participation ribbons and, oh, it's okay, your feelings, all this and that. We got to meet somewhere in the middle. Because what's happening now is the two sides are approaching, and this generation's acting the way they are, and the older guys are like, this isn't going to work. Everybody gets frustrated and walks away. Well, guess what? These problems are just going to get worse because we're looking at, everybody talks about the labor shortage and all that stuff, but I think we're just at the start of it now. And Bruno, I see your hand up. I'll get to you in one sec. There's a lot of efforts to promoting the trades, especially to younger demographics, which is great. But we're already at the point where we're feeling the effects of a shortage of people. So yeah, in 5, 6, 10 years, high school students are going to be able to contribute meaningfully to the construction industry. But what's going to happen in that midterm, the next 5 to 10 years, when all the boomers and Gen X's are retiring, and it's guys Neil's age and myself and younger taking the reins, don't necessarily have that experience and that maybe the education, but not the experience or the years through it. So we got to find a way to bridge that gap and meet somewhere in the middle. Sorry, Bruno, go ahead.
Good night, Angelo. Here, Bruno Garcia. I'm living in Sudbury, northeastern Ontario. First, I'd like to tell you that I appreciate the subject of your presentation tonight. For me, living here in Northern Ontario is so uncommon to have this type of subject here. I will complete 3 years next week living here in Canada and in Sudbury specifically, and I can see with my eyes the difference between the mentality that we have in here and in comparison with the GTA. And just to complete my thought, I'd like to say that it's really nice, this advanced subject of humanization inside of construction and how to have this sector more humanized, right? But sometimes my feeling is that this type of subject is so advanced that sometimes we don't have even a time to have a feedback, even a time to have a talk with our boss, with our manager, right?
Yeah.
It's even before we have the subject that you are bringing to us tonight. It's something more basic. I don't know what's your opinion about that.
But we barely have enough time to do our basic jobs now, let alone have time to mentor and guide younger people, which is absolutely correct. Because the way the industry is going, at least the way I see it, I've always worked around Toronto, the Greater Toronto area, but it's jobs are getting more complicated in terms of technology. Drawings are getting shittier. Engineering is not there, and there's a huge gap between design and construction. Schedules are getting more compressed. Somehow we're supposed to be able to magically build faster. I don't know. Budgets are getting tighter. People are leaving, so we have to do more with less. And you're right. If I'm a 30-year-old veteran or like in the industry 30 years, and somebody's telling me I need to make more time out of my day to spend and teach with younger people, I might not necessarily have the tools to do that because a lot of people who have that experience in those years aren't good at coaching. Like a good player doesn't necessarily make a good coach, right? So it's the technical skills and it's the time. So I think, it's hugely important for the future of the construction industry to find a way. Maybe not necessarily, you obviously can't create more time, but there's got to be a mechanism to broaden the reach of those more experienced people to get to younger people, whether it is a formal type of mentorship program. Maybe it's not at an organizational level, might be part of, I don't know, a trade union or a trade association, because then you're not pigeonholed within the same company. You can kind of go more broad. But sorry, Bruno, I don't have any magic bullets or answers there, but it is a huge challenge the whole time, time management aspect. Another hand up there, Rushab. Did I say that right?
Yeah, hi Angelo. Good morning. I mean, good night. It's morning in India only. So I'm working as a project engineer since 2 years now in an MNC here, and on the basis of my bachelor's only. And I was thinking if I should or if I could shift to USA in construction project management industry only. I wanted to know what's the scope there. Should I be doing that or I should be continuing here? in this industry on construction project management.
So you're talking potentially immigrating to North America?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. In this, hmm,
So I had this conversation today with somebody actually at the building show.
okay,
I live in Canada, and I'm not an immigration expert, but I know the way that they look at what they need to bring into the company is by demand in
okay,
sectors, basically. So in the next few
yeah,
years, I don't know what
hmm,
it's like in other parts of the world. I've heard that shortages are pretty prevalent in other. It's not just a North American thing, but I think there's
hmm,
going to be lots of opportunity. Mind you, the whole government thing's going on. I don't want to get into politics, but there is going to need to be
understandable.
there is going to need there is a vacuum that needs to be filled with skilled trades as well as project management. So is your question about whether to stay on the project management route or go into a different part of construction?
Construction project management.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think, if that's what you're passionate about, that's definitely what you should stay in because, again, you want to be fulfilled in what you're doing. And if you like building, so
yeah,
I would keep doing what you're doing and see what opportunities come up on the immigration front.
understood. And any tips for starting as a project management guy? Because I'm a rookie only. I have just started. It's
Yeah.
just 2 years.
Uh,
So,
for me, what helped me a lot was just making connections, talking to people, and not necessarily project
hmm,
management. Like you don't, like
yeah,
as a project manager, you don't have to necessarily connect with project managers. That helps, but learning about the different trades, connecting with sub trades, connecting with other
yeah,
peers, connecting with finance, HR, like these are all important parts of the business that you need to learn about. It's not just managing
understood.
projects.
Understood. Okay.
Thanks for the
Thank you.
question.
If I could just throw in on top of Rashad and what Angela you were talking about, as far as it should be, in my opinion, mandatory on the project management side specifically for construction. Hopefully, all around the world. Spend some time in the trailer. Get out into the field. Everyone should spend a couple of years in the field, whether you're an account payable, project
Yeah.
management, superintendent. Like you really need to get out to the site because these opportunities are fleeting and people will definitely hold you in high regard if they recognize that you're actually interested in seeing the work get done.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point, Neil. Thanks for that. And not only will that, so the point about connecting with other people, even outside of what you're exactly doing, that builds huge credibility. And not only does it provide a more well-rounded career for yourself, because then you learn about different people's jobs, but let's face it, people care more about themselves than you. So if you show interest in them and you show that you want to learn about what they have to offer and you ask questions and encourage them to teach you what they know. People love talking about what they know. They love feeling important, right? Everybody loves to feel validated and important. So by connecting with others, you give them the opportunity to share their knowledge. You make them feel good. And that's going to help you make a good connection with them. Thanks, Neil. That was a good point there. Any other questions or comments from anybody?
Hey, so I have a question, and I'll give a little bit of a preface. I'm a 27-year-old mechanical constructor. I'm a sheet metal worker, and just by circumstance, I kind of got thrown into the position I'm in now. Although I'm a third year, excuse me, I'm a third year apprentice, but I run the entire construction department at the company I'm in.
Okay.
And I'm kind of looking at things backwards from how you were explaining them as far as like the age gap, because now at 27 years old, I have people that are 30 years older than me working for me.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be your best advice to navigate that sort of relationship as such a young person being in this kind of higher up position when it's almost backwards from how it should be?
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat back the question to make sure I understood it, and because we're on another feed here, but basically, as a young leader, which we'll call it that, manager, whatever you want to call it, how do you navigate the generational divide when you're essentially managing or leading people who are way more experienced and may even, may even look down on you a little bit? Do you get that vibe, Kevin?
Yeah, sometimes, and I mean, it works. It just maybe not as well as it should. It just is kind of, you know, I have 10 years in this trade, and I
Yeah,
was raised in the trade by an old school um, foreman, like you talk about a lot, and so it's hard for me to not like go back to the ways that I was trained when I'm
yeah.
talking to the guys that work for me. And so I was just wondering how you think that you would, if you were in my position, how you would kind of navigate that relationship or start to
Yeah.
navigate that.
I think number one is set the. I don't know how far you are into it if you've just started, but set the tone by saying, and I've done this before too. I was a little bit older than you. I was 30 when I had my first management position. It was an estimating department, and I had a meeting with everybody, and I was just open and honest. And I said, "Look, guys, you have a lot more experience than me. You have a lot more to offer. I'm not here to," and I still tell people this that I manage. I'm not here to tell you how to do your job. I'm here to help you do it. I'm here to remove the roadblocks. I'm here to grease the wheels and all that, not to direct, right? Because they probably know a lot more than you if they've got the experience. So look at it as a learning experience. It does get a little awkward when it comes to disciplinary stuff and maybe reminding them to follow processes and all that. But in terms of just create that open environment where it's not a dictatorship. It can't be a democracy because then nothing will get done. But just be open to their suggestions, open to their point of view. And like I was saying before, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater because everybody brings a good perspective. And I find that is the best way to approach these situations. Just be open with people and say, like, look, I don't know everything. I'm going to learn from you, but you got to respect me too. I've been put in this role and we got to work together to figure this out. But I've always seen that, especially if you're leading people, whether you're a working foreman or whatever, still on the tools, you're there to help them get their job done and be the best they can be. Sometimes that includes telling them what to do, but very rarely does it. It shouldn't come to that all the time because then you get the wrong people. It should be just about getting them the tools, getting them uh, in the right situations and the right mindset to get the work done. Does that make sense, Kevin?
Yeah, no, I think that was a really good answer. I think that's gonna help a lot. And I see your comment, Neil, that um, that will definitely go far as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Again, it's worth reiterating, like I mentioned before, people love to talk about what they know. They love to brag. They love to feel important. So giving them that opportunity, asking questions is huge, right? Like even if somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, Kevin, I got this problem. What should we do?" You could say, "Well, what do you think?" Instead, I think we always look, especially like I'm an engineer by training, and that's how my brain is wired. I'm always looking to solve problems and provide solutions. But sometimes it's better to not throw it back on somebody else because, like, oh, I don't want to deal with it. It's your problem. But just open up that conversation. What do you think we should do? What would you do? Oh, okay, I would do this. What do you think about that? Always kind of leave it open ended and keep people in the loop.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. Thank you again.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining. Appreciate it. Uh, what, in terms of people's experience with mentorship, like I talked a little bit about that and how, when I was at a younger stage in my career, I had a little bit of FOMO. I felt like I was missing out on having a mentor. But looking back now, I've realized like, holy shit, I had a lot of people who really helped me out. Did that resonate with anybody, or you have similar or different types of experiences?
I know I can speak from experience in that, I've worked for quite a few different companies. If anything, I'm sort of the Goldilocks when it comes to trying out different programs and different outfits. And over the years, the people who've really had an impact on me, just like anyone else would say, like these are people I hold pretty close to me. We may not talk every day, and there may be people I've been out of place or haven't spoken to in over 10 or 15 years, but some of the things they've said to me and some of the cheesy sayings and stuff, they've really, really stuck with me for a very, very long time.
Yeah. So, and probably at the time you didn't even realize they were doing it. And you're like, oh, wow, I did learn something from that guy. So it's, you never know what people have to offer. So, but yeah, no, if there's nothing else, guys, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining. We'll see. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I'm open to hear your feedback if you want to share. I'm always looking for ways I can do things better or differently, help as many people as possible right now. So just some ways to contact me here. You probably all got my email because you've got the link. and Instagram's the best way. I'm also on LinkedIn, but you can check that out. So take care, guys.